You've felt this before, even if you never gave it a second thought. A plane at altitude, a tunnel with no bars, a dead stretch of road, no signal, no Wi-Fi for miles in any direction. And you talk to your phone anyway. Dictate a message, translate a sign, let it correct your typing before you finish the word, and it just works. Which is strange when you actually stop to think about it. Because you always assumed the clever part of your phone lived somewhere else, far away, in a building you'll never see, where a data center did the actual work. But more and more often, it didn't. And that raises a question almost nobody is stopping to ask. What if it could do more? What if the full power of artificial intelligence, the kind we were told could only ever live in the cloud, humming on a rack of servers in a warehouse the size of a stadium, could sit, in its entirety, inside the phone in your hand? Offline. Private. Yours. That's not a prediction. As of right now, it's already true. And most people have no idea it's happened. Because there is a piece of silicon in your pocket that most people have never heard of. It unlocks your phone with your face. It cleans up your photos in the dark. And it has quietly become powerful enough to run a mind. You just never learned its name. So how did the intelligence we were promised lives in the cloud end up in the palm of your hand? And what happens now that it's there? The answer changes everything we think we know about the mind that now fits in your pocket, the machines quietly appearing on our desks, and what happens when that intelligence stops just answering you and starts acting on its own. Let's start with the mind, because for years, the rule seemed unbreakable. Real intelligence is simply too big for a phone. It has to live in the cloud. Then, on April 2nd, 2026, Google quietly broke that rule for good. They released a model called Gemma 4, and the smallest version of it, the one they call E2B, was built for exactly one place: your pocket. It doesn't just handle text, it sees. It reads a menu, a chart, a handwritten note, a road sign in a language you've never encountered, and it understands them. It listens and transcribes your voice. It was trained on more than 140 languages, and it does every bit of this running completely offline. On a phone, on a Raspberry Pi, on a chip the size of a stamp, with no internet connection at all. Here's the trick they pulled. The full model actually holds around 5 billion parameters, but it never runs them all at once. Using a technique called per-layer embeddings, most of those parameters sit parked in fast storage, and only about 2 billion of them, the effective ones, ever switch on at the moment it thinks. Just enough to answer you, while sparing your memory and your battery. In 4-bit, that active core fits in about 1.5 gigabytes of RAM. The intelligence didn't get dumber to fit in your hand. It got denser. And none of it would run without the other half of the story, the chip. Back in 2017, Apple carved out a piece of silicon inside the iPhone whose only job was to think. It could do 600 billion operations a second. 6 years later, that number was 35 trillion. And by 2024, Microsoft wouldn't even let a laptop call itself an AI PC unless it carried a chip that could do at least 40 trillion operations a second, locally, with the cloud switched off. The hardware got quietly, absurdly powerful. Gemma is simply the first real mind dense enough to use it. This isn't a stripped-down toy version of the real thing. This is the real thing. A full, multimodal mind, sitting in your palm and never once phoning home. But a phone is only where this starts. Because if a 2 billion parameter mind fits in your pocket, the obvious question is, how far up does this go? And the answer arrived, on desks, faster than almost anyone expected. In October 2025, NVIDIA put a machine small enough to sit beside your monitor, the DGX Spark, with 128 gigabytes of memory and enough power to run a model with 200 billion parameters, locally, for around $4,000. AMD built its own version and folded it into a mini PC the size of a lunchbox, for closer to 2. Apple built a Mac you could buy off the shelf, with enough memory to hold a 400 billion parameter model in one piece. Sit with that for a second. The kind of AI that in 2023 needed a rack of servers, a data center a cooling bill, and a monthly subscription, you can now buy once, plug into a wall socket, and run on your own desk. Offline, private, never leaving the room. The cloud was never the natural home of intelligence. It was just the only place big enough to hold it, until the machines in our own homes finally caught up. A mind that once filled a building now sits on a desk and runs on a wall socket. But here is where it stops being merely impressive and turns into something else entirely. Because a model that can answer you is one thing. A model that can act for you is another. That's what a harness like Hermes Agent from a lab called Noose Research is built to do. You point it at a model, even a small one running locally on your own machine, and it stops behaving like a chatbot. It starts using tools, calling functions, taking steps, finishing tasks on its own. And it remembers. Every skill it picks up, every detail it learns about you, it writes to a small database on your own hardware. Noose never sees a single word of it. It's an agent that grows with you, and only you. Now put the two halves together. Gemma, thinking offline on your device. Hermes, turning that thinking into action. And suddenly you're holding something that 3 years ago was pure science fiction. A private, capable, autonomous assistant, living entirely on hardware you own, taking real actions in the real world, with the internet switched off. This was never really about answering your questions faster. It was about who your intelligence answers to. Because when the AI in your life runs on your device, learns on your device, and stays on your device, there is no one else in the room. And that is a far bigger deal than it sounds. Because all of this has happened once before. In the 1960s, computing lived in exactly one place, the mainframe, locked in a cold, humming room. You didn't own a computer. You owned a terminal, a dumb screen that shipped your keystrokes off to the big machine and waited. Then the personal computer put real power on your own desk. And then, in 2006, the cloud pulled it all back again, and your devices shrank into dumb terminals all over again, glowing rectangles that send your words to a warehouse and wait. The last few years of AI have been exactly that. The mainframe era running one more time. You at a terminal. The intelligence locked in a building you will never see. A building that in 2024 burned through roughly 415 terawatt hours of electricity, drank an estimated 560 billion liters of water just to stay cool, and read every word you typed on a computer that was never yours. So what happens when the pendulum swings back one more time? When the smartest thing you own no longer has to ask that warehouse for permission to think. When it can see and speak 140 languages and act on your behalf, on a plane, in a tunnel, deep underground, with no signal and no one watching. For a few short years, we believed intelligence had to be enormous and distant and rented. That to think a single thought, your phone had to whisper to a warehouse hundreds of miles away. But the models got smaller. A stadium's worth of computing folded down until it fit in your hand. The machines got closer, from a warehouse you'll never see to a box beside your monitor. And the intelligence stopped merely answering and began to act. The most powerful technology humans have ever built is quietly leaving the cloud and moving into a chip in your pocket. One you've never heard of. One that can already see, already speak, already act, offline and entirely yours. And most of us never even noticed it arrive.